20 days, 7 brutal races and only 72 finishers worldwide. Those are the stats of the ruthless Pinky Sisu stage race. Up until now, I've treated all my races as individual efforts only, but this event changed everything for me. Was I strong enough to even finish among those 72? Let me tell you about it. If you are following my channel, you know I've had a pretty rough winter, at least when it came to cycling. I've been sick like 6 times, and each time it looked like I might get better, just another hit came. As a result, I didn't meaningfully progress, I gained some weight, and I sort of burned myself out. So when Zwift Games 2025 concluded, I decided to take a little break from racing. Don't get me wrong, I was still riding and training, but I wanted to give my body and mind a little break from those crazy all-out efforts. But as you will all probably understand, I got that competitive itch back pretty soon. At the time I was on a holiday in Netherlands where I didn't have my bike with me, so naturally I was making plans about what I would do in terms of cycling upon my return. And then one night I was browsing Zwift Insider in a hotel room and noticed that something called Pinky Sisu stage race was about to start the day after my return. And that caught my attention, because I need to admit I have been eyeing stage races for a few months actually. It first started when I saw a video from a guy with a nickname Not Poggy, in which he was doing an FRR stage race, and when I commented on his video, he responded, "It would be cool to see you try this series at some point." Well, this was not that series, but it was a stage race too. Then again, I was sort of hesitant to do this right after my return from the holidays. I didn't race for a month, now I didn't even cycle for a week, and honestly, my Zwift games this year weren't really that glamorous. Not to mention that I would have 10-hour drive behind me while attempting the stage 1. But I knew that at some point soon I would need to get back into racing anyway, and now I would have the perfect excuse if I didn't do well. And honestly, as I sort of understand now, perceived fatigue is usually way more mental than physical. And so as it happened, I was at the start line of stage 1. And boy, what a rude awakening it was. The first route was the Big Ring, over 50 kilometers with just one climb out of the jungle, otherwise almost pancake flat route. And the start was rough, actually a way more rough than I expected. The way it usually works is it goes hard for a minute or two and then it settles into a more reasonable pace. Here it didn't. Even after 10 minutes I was still in red numbers, and I didn't even have my FTP set correctly here. Because what I didn't actually know at the time was that this was a mass start, so by trying to stay with the front I was actually accepting the A+ pace, which in theory on flat ground shouldn't be that much of an issue for me, but once again, at this point in time I was about as unfit as you can possibly be going into a Zwift race. About 12 minutes in and it actually looks like I might be dropped, and I really needed to muster all my strength to push the power to rejoin the group. I did, but my heart rate got into 180s, which after 10 kilometers of 50k race wasn't a good sign. And the same thing continued on and on and on, until this point at which I realized that this pace isn't going to go for me. There was still almost 40k left. So I eased up, rested a little bit, and eventually joined the next group that formed behind me. And that was actually way more reasonable of a ride for me. It was still challenging, but I was not hanging on by a thread. Once again, don't judge my performance here based on the power chart. As I was saying, my FTP here was set about 20 watts too high, so although it looks like I'm going quite easy, I'm really not. Here we, however, entered the first and only climb of the day, the climb out of the jungle, and while this one isn't like crazy difficult, it is still about 10 minutes of a solid work. At first, my group has escaped me, but then I saw that they aren't really getting away from me, so I hit the gas pedal in an effort to rejoin the group for the remainder of the race. 10k to go, and I sort of felt at this point that we were going kind of unnecessarily slow. By the way, don't pay attention to my heart rate here, for some reason my heart rate monitor goofed up. So once again, I made a search to catch up the group of 3 guys in front of us, and to my surprise, almost no one was following. And in this group, we were speeding towards the finish line, and it looked like it is going to be a peaceful end to what was otherwise a pretty hard race. But then Rob, who by the way also has a great YouTube channel, claimed in chat that he wanted to beat me. and you can probably guess what effect that had on me. At this point, he had 34 seconds onto me though, so I didn't really think I had any chance to contest him. But then, only 1 kilometer before the end, I looked at the board and saw his advantage is now only 17 seconds, so I decided to give it a go. I kicked up the pace up to somewhere around my FTP, so if it came to it, I would have energy left for the sprint. But with 400 meters to go, Rob still had 9 seconds onto me, and that's just about a hair more than what I would have wanted. I really pushed it at this point, going into full-scale sprint with 250 meters to go, and in the end it was way closer than I would have thought. He beat me, but only about 1 bite length. I finished at 73rd spot out of 199 riders, and despite this being quite a rude awakening, it wasn't a disaster by any means. But little did I know this was the easiest stage of them all. Because the stage number 2 was a time trial, and not just any time trial. It was the exact same course the pro riders did during Giro d'Italia 2019. Technically it's only 8 kilometers, but the last 2 of those kilometers are very uphill. The average gradient here is almost 10%, and the steepest section actually measures over 20%. As I have never done a time trial before this stage, I've looked up some videos about pacing and this course specifically, and figured it is going to be the best to do a little under my estimated FTP on the flat section and a little over my estimated FTP on the climb. And it sort of worked. I probably could have paced it a little bit better, as I still had some juice left at the end to increase the power, but considering this was my first TT attempt, I'd say I can be pretty content with how I have done it. Unfortunately, I was not able to complete this in under 20 minutes, but I still finished at 49th spot out of 91 riders, which, considering this is a climbing time trial, wasn't really all that terrible. But despite that performance, I sort of realized one thing here. My 78 kilograms were significantly restraining my ability to perform in any stage that had a climb longer than, say, 2 minutes. And since the next stage had an epic KOM climb in the middle, I sort of knew I was in trouble. So I made a significant and honestly quite life-altering decision here. I would start counting calories again. Not to restrict myself to hell, but to remove the biggest problems from my eating habits. Stage 3 brought us to Tides and Temples route. 36 kilometers on a fairly flat terrain, but with the epic KOM climb in the middle, which I knew would destroy me. But there was more to it than just racing at this point. Since this was a Grand Tour, the people here were basically the same each time, and it was a really nice environment to race in. I decided to embrace the fact that this is a mixed race and once again went with the front right from the start. It was hard again, but this time I felt just a little bit better than in the first race, and I was able to hold onto the group basically until the start of the climb. As for the climb itself, I decided it would be the best if I held my own pace without trying to stay with the group. That way I could arrive at the top of the grade doing hard but controlled effort. I did, and it was time for a fairly long descent and recovery. When we reached the bottom, I saw there were some guys in front of me and I thought it would be nice to rejoin them, so to preserve the downhill momentum, I popped the feather power up and put the pedal down. I immediately dropped the one guy I was riding with and chased the ones in front of me. A few minutes later, I actually managed to catch them. And at this point, my only remaining goal in this race was to outsprint them all. It was actually a really strategic finish. In the last few hundred meters we were basically riding a recovery pace, and I thought it is going to be an easy finish for me. But one of the guys actually surprised me because he had even better sprint than I had. I just managed to hold it for a little bit longer. Fourth stage brought us to one of the most unique routes I've ever experienced on Zwift, Derdring-Verfechan. Very hilly route, but none of the climbs were too severe. I made a video about this race, but basically during this race I experienced with using zero trainer difficulty, and long story short, it was a horrible experience. I was unable to really modulate my effort well and probably spent way more energy than I needed as a result. It's probably not surprising here, but I got dropped from the front group on the suspension bridge climb. At this point I wasn't still in shape to be able to go with those guys, and I have to admit, it is a little discouraging to be dropped whenever there is a climb on the route. I was even wondering at this point if doing this whole thing has any value, but I was hoping that I could probably finish with the second group, as the remaining 2 climbs weren't all that horrible. As you know, if you watch that video, that ambition went out of the window when I realized I locked my wife out of the apartment and had to get off my bike for a minute to let her in. So I did the final climb in the Titans Grove with the third group, and I was sort of ready to throw in the towel in this whole Grand Tour if I got dropped even now. Thankfully that didn't happen, and I was able to secure 92nd spot out of 162 riders, which was about as much as I could have done in this race. After the race, I eventually concluded that this whole endeavor isn't just about succeeding, but mainly preserving, challenging my never quit mindset. I told myself that overcoming the frustration is just another part of the game. Little did I know what would come in race number 5. Because in this stage, the race had the most brutal start I've ever experienced, and it was not close. We've had about 10 A+ riders on the start line, and they made it very clear that they do not intend to let this race turn into a sleeping train. Watch the power chart now. We are 55 kilometers in, we've reached the Dirty Sorpresa, and my power chart is almost exclusively red. Now the important thing is this was a 55-kilometer route with a volcano climb at the finish, so spending myself completely here is a really dumb idea, but I really didn't want to get dropped after 7 minutes, basically on flat terrain. But I did. Basically no matter what I did, it just wasn't enough. So not only I'm getting dropped on any climb, this time I was dropped even on flat terrain, and I couldn't have done anything with it. Besides maybe completely nuking myself, but then I would probably not even finish this stage. Very quickly though, we formed another group, and later in the desert flats another one joined us, so I had pretty nice company to ride towards the volcano. The climb itself takes about 7 to 8 minutes to complete, and I wanted to maintain about 260 watts on this climb, but for the first 3 minutes I got a little carried away. I did over 300 watts and then eventually bonked, so I had to finish this climb somewhere between 200 and 250 watts. All in all, I don't think this race was some sort of a disaster. I finished at 76th spot out of 174, but I got just another reminder of how important it is to stick to the plan that you set beforehand. And speaking about setting the plan, it was tricky to do so for the next stage because it was a gravel stage and I've never done that before either. So here we are in stage number 6 on Serpentine 8, a route that is 27 kilometers long and it's never flat, you either go up or down. What's more, pretty much all besides the first kilometer or 2 is on gravel. So I did my research on Zwifter bikes and learned that the most efficient bike on this route is going to be a mountain bike. Thinking I was going to need as much of a help as possible, I bought the best rated one and joined the race. But there was a problem with that kind of approach. Yes, the mountain bike is technically the best bike for this route, but the first 2 kilometers are still on pavement, which means that all the riders who took the road bike will drop you before the gravel section even starts. It's even a little bit downhill, which more increases the aero advantage of the road bikes. And of course, that's exactly what happened. I wasn't that much behind though, and going into the jungle I was comfortably sitting in the second group. My strategy for this race was to punch the climbs and recover on the descents, but it was hard. The stage profile was far from the one that would give me any sort of advantage, and it was also stupidly hot on that day. What's more, I didn't like the mountain bike. I don't know if it was only my feeling, but I really didn't feel the performance advantage that bike should have given me. I wanted to finish at least in the top 100, so on the final short climb I really punched the power and it literally had zero effect. All the riders with me sped up as well. So once again, I would need to win my top 100 in a sprint, and a slightly uphill one at that. There was another guy from my country actually attacking 600 meters before the finish, which was way too long for my liking, but I increased the power and with about 100 meters to go, I managed to catch him. I finished at 97th spot, and despite this being my worst result in this series so far, I actually felt stronger this time. I was able to do power at times that I wouldn't have been able to do on stage 1. There was only one stage remaining, but that stage was straight up insane. The final stage is here and we are doing the Zwift Games 25 Queen course, 45 kilometers and almost 1000 vertical meters. This one is no joke. It first brings you to the Jarvis Island and even this small climb is enough to split the group. Despite doing my best effort on this climb so far, I quickly found myself in the first chasing group with like 10 other guys, one of which was Steven, a super nice guy who was one of the first guys to follow my channel, great rider, and who also has a very quickly growing YouTube channel. Definitely go check him out. And that allowed me to set a strategy for this race. Steven is definitely better than me, but it's not like impossible margin, so I figured I could stick to his wheel and leech from his draft for as long as possible. Ideally until the epic KOM, but even if it was just the great, it would be fantastic. But the first challenge arrived actually way sooner. On the climb to the bridge that leads to the bottom of epic KOM, I didn't feel like continuing with the group and almost got dropped. But it was one of those times when it's mental and not physical. I was lucky to realize it fairly quickly and I managed to search and regroup with those guys, but it was harder than I thought. Then we had some time to recover, but very quickly there was time for another bump in the road. Actually, not one bump, 3 bumps, each of them being harder than the one before. Mayan KOM, Itza KOM, and finally the upper portion of the grade. Mayan KOM was pretty okay, the pace was hard but reasonable, but that was about it. Before reaching the steepest part of the Itza KOM, I got slight cramps in my leg and that was it for my presence in this group. The funny thing is, my heart rate wasn't even that high at this point. I quickly gobbled some salt pills and finished the climb up the grade in a very controlled manner. I tried to avoid any sudden movements before the salt pill took effect, because as long as it's just a little twinge in the muscles, it's fine. But once the full cramps go, it's almost impossible to finish the race, especially with epic KOM being at the end. And you may be wondering, why did I get cramps now, when I've been doing races like this regularly and never had any problems before? Well, do you remember my recent RAM test video? I've done the test the night before this race, because I wanted to do the test exactly after 666 days on Zwift, and this is how it was. I recovered fairly well on the descent, and then on the epic KOM I took a very steady effort, alone I might add, but the cramps didn't develop any further and I managed to finish this race on 40th spot out of 107 riders, which considering the profile of this race is probably my best result in this series. I finished the general classification on 43rd spot out of 72 riders, but what's way more important than the result are the things I learned from this whole experience. Firstly, I improved a ton during this race, from being totally useless in stage 1, through hanging onto the best riders in the middle, to climbing with fair bit of confidence in stage 7. My fitness really ramped up and it hasn't stopped there. Not too long after this event, I actually managed to win my first ever race. And it's continuing. Right now, I'm probably the most fit I've ever been before. I have 1 week to go before my first outdoor race, and I finally feel I'm back in the game. Secondly, I realized I'm going to need to lose weight. From the start of this series, I've already lost 3 kilos. I'm counting calories very diligently and trying to supplement it with a lot of training. Last but not least, this event really improves my mental approach to racing. When you are doing just individual races, it is very easy to postpone them if you do not feel like it, if you feel tired and so on. In an event like this, you don't have that option. You either do the race or you can throw the whole event out of the window. And you know what? A lot of the times the perceived fatigue is purely mental and just drops from you the second you sit on your bike. If you haven't done series like this before, I would strongly recommend you doing it. I'm sure there's going to be one to accompany Tour de France as well, and I can promise you, you will learn a lot about yourself. Hope you liked this video. If you did, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to see the impact this series had on my fitness, watch the video about my first ever win on Zwift. It's right here.